Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you're joining. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar discussion, De-risk Your Launch Strategy, hosted by Reuters and ZS Partnership. I'm going to hand over to our esteemed panel, today's esteemed panel, starting with Anton Yarovoy. Over to you, Anton.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anton Yarovoy. I'm the Group Project Director of Precision Medicine at J&J.
Greeting from Zurich. This is Hamid, Global Launch Lead for Rare Disease in Novo Nordisk.
Hello from Chicago. I'm Emily Mandel. I lead our launch practice focused on how the industry can continue to launch more effectively in the future.
Hi, my name is Maya Schlesinger in New York City. I am a launch leader at Global Oncology at Pfizer.
And I just wanted to communicate that all of us panelists are joining as individuals, and the words that we share today represent our own opinions and not those of our companies. So I'm going to just, the webinar is called De-risking Our Launch Strategy. Much of the topic that we're going to discuss today focuses on this concept of personalization at launch. And so I'm going to be just defining that so we all know how we're going to, when we say that term, when all of us talk about that term, what we mean. Noah, the slides went away from me. I just want to make sure that they're still visible for everyone else. Okay, they're back now. So let's go to the next slide. I want to define what we mean by personalization. So when we talk about that term today, we're talking about right from day one, so right from day one of launch, strategically customizing content and channels based on an individual customer's needs, beliefs, preferences, motivations, practice type, etc. Now, many brands will do this at some point in their life cycle. It's at this point, known and accepted in the industry that this type of personalization adds value. But it doesn't always happen at launch. And one of the main things we're going to discuss today is, should it, why doesn't it, how could it? And that's what we'll be discussing as a team. Now, this could apply to really any customer. Most of our discussion today is going to focus on the HCP, but the concept of course, could apply to other customers as well. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to share just a couple of data points to set the stage, and then I'm going to open it up to my fellow panelists here to jump in. So launch, I don't think it's a surprise why we're talking about launch. Launch is, well accepted as a critical window. And the stat is often thrown around, which is that, half of pharma launches don't meet analyst expectations. One could argue, is it the expectations or is it the launch? But this number is actually getting better. So if you look 10 years ago, this number was about 60% of launches failing to meet expectations, and now it's closer to 40. I hope certainly that that's due to many of the advances that we've all embraced in terms of strategy and content and technology. So this number is getting better, but the first 12 to 18 months is this really critical window. We've analyzed over 100 recent launches, and it's almost impossible to change the shape of your curve after that 18-month period, unless something really unique happens, like a competitor gets pulled or something like that. So yes, you can continue to grow and reach peak, in 8 years instead of 4, but the shape of the curve really does not meaningfully change within a single indication. So we know it's this critical window. We know it's a critical window. We know personalization happens later. So does it happen at launch? Next slide, Noah. We surveyed about 100 launch leaders together with Reuters, and we asked them all sorts of questions about how they've come to market in their launch. And we asked about personalization. Did they customize content, message, channels, tactics? And if you look at all that data together, you see a picture that about 10 to 15% of those launches personalized content at some kind of individual customer level. About 40 to 50% personalize at a segment level, so maybe 2 to 3 groups as an example, and then half didn't personalize at all at launch. They may have done it later, but not at day one. So certainly it's not the norm. It is still the exception. And I'd like to now open it up to my fellow panelists. Should it be?
Absolutely. So I guess I'll maybe kickstart this one. I think it's very important to have that level of personalization pre-launch because there's a lot of different stakeholders that you may be reaching, and it's important to understand what their needs are. And fortunately, since we've done so many launches historically, as an industry or in the product space, we have a good understanding of what our different customer segments require. And so we should be able to kind of utilize that data to understand how to really customize some of the messaging to the different stakeholders so that by the time launch arrives, we can actually have kind of a more of an impactful statement and allow for that level of personalization.
So using sort of what we know, not just from this launch, but what we know about these customers, maybe from a prior launch or somebody saying it. And so do you think that happen? Does that happen? Do we bring learnings from customers from prior launches to, is that common?
I think we do. I do feel like I think a lot of times we do have like resource constraints potentially, right? And we want to, declutter the messaging, right? We always want to streamline, but I think it's possible to streamline several messages based on key segments, right? Especially if you're reaching very different type of individuals across a process, right? So like, in precision medicine, you may be reaching pathologists and medical oncologists and interventionalists and that are different types of stakeholders that all kind of ladder up to the same kind of stakeholder needs, and then they have individual processes to play in the launch, right? So you can do a little bit of customization there because of that, and we do know those stakeholders quite well, so we can personalize to them.
Hamid, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, sure. And if we look at this topic from the TA perspective, of course, for some TAs is not an option. So for rare disease is must to do. So we cannot go to handful of customers without knowing them in depth. So there are a lot of engagement pre-launch. At launch time, we have a clear understanding what are the customer needs, what do they need from us, how should we deliver our content and messages. So for rare disease, it's must to have, and we are going to have it, and we have it from day one. However, for some other TAs, when we go to mass TAs like obesity, diabetes, these type of TAs, the personalization is a bit different and it's in a different level is done. So it's a more group of our customers that we consider and bucket them as a different needs, and then we approach them. But still the personalization is needed, and it's really help to have a successful launch. So this successful launch also is important to mention. It doesn't mean that we sell, it means that we maximize our selling. So it's not just about selling our product. We want to get the maximization, and that cannot be done without personalization.
Those are great points, all of you. I think for me, one of the key things is a launch trajectory in the first 6 months. It's really difficult to change that trajectory once you're kind of on a certain path. So whatever we can do in the early days is critical. I think that's the first point I wanted to make. And I think the other thing is like thinking about it in a practical approach, right? Like potentially start a pilot with one physician segment that we know more about, right? I think pilots are the way to go. If we don't feel comfortable, it's kind of like sometimes baby steps with a lot of these new innovative ways to do these launches. So I think that's another way to do it. And then also like bite-sized content, right? Like start small, start with something that's not a huge CVA, like if we could have like a now approved look a little bit different, for one segment. I think that would be great. So I think it's kind of like ensuring that for one segment, we learn more about them, give them the right message kind of at the right moment. And I think starting small is the way to go. I think that transforming the way we do launches overnight won't happen, but if we can start with a pilot with one segment that we know a lot about, could really work and be a quick win.
Yeah, the transforming is a good point. I think that there are playbooks. There are playbooks. Every organization has them. There's a way to do it. And a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, I know that there's these different groups of customers exist, but I feel like I have a really good story, and I worked really hard to come up with this story, and this is my value prop, and this is my narrative, and I just want to get that story out to everyone. And then later I'll think about, if I have to do anything different, but I don't want to complicate it. Is that something you guys have heard?
Yes, yes. I mean, the idea is once again, kind of focusing on a single message because you want to, keep it very narrow and kind of building on what Maya said too, right? If you keep it small and as a pilot, right, initially you can kind of test it, and so you can create a feedback loop to kind of do kind of incremental improvements. I'm assuming that's where you were going with that, Maya, right? Right. And it's interesting. One of the questions that actually just popped in also about, kind of the coordination aspect came into the chat, right? Whether it can create some friction and how do you kind of balance some of those collaboration gaps too. And so part of that is understanding the needs of the various segments. But then when you have the different teams, right, different teams are engaged at different times. So you have medical a lot of times is upfront doing a lot of knowledge, while commercial can only really do disease state awareness at a very set time before a particular launch. And so, they're delivering different types of messages as those teams. And it's really the feedback loops that are created as part of data sharing. And the analytics team really comes into that feedback loop because they can kind of see how the messages are doing, especially if they're being circulated as part of your centralized omni-channel or next best messaging or whichever acronym you're using for your internal kind of omni-channel approach. And that kind of elevates which messages are doing better than others, and then you can focus more energy on those messages. Um, as you might maybe want to build on that.
Sure. I mean, I think the reason pilots are great is because you understand that segment and it's a quick win, right? You have to show that you're successful before you change everything, right? And so I found, like, let's just take for an example, early adopters, those that we know that adopt new therapies first, like maybe we want to go and try and see what they think of this, and is that making impact? So that's kind of how we've, typically approached it, is like really thinking about um, physician segments. If we have another product that has been in that space, definitely what we do is take the learnings from that product, and take those forward to a new product launch. So Anton, I totally agree with you. I think having kind of like one segment that we know we can get a quick win will help to kind of move forward and expand further to other segments.
Yep.
So let's continue this conversation maybe on the next slide, and I'll try to address some of the questions in the chat as well, because we did collect some input in this survey that I mentioned about what are some of the challenges that are keeping people from launching with this level of personalization on day one. And I'm going to just repeat the definition because I see the number is much higher than in the first couple of minutes of the webinar. So when we say personalization at launch today, we mean right at day one, a strategic customization of content and channels for an individual customer's needs, something that often comes later. We're talking about that concept at day one. Most of our discussion today is focused on the HCP, although that definition could apply, or that concept can certainly apply to all customers. So one of the things that what we hear when we ask sort of what's keeping you from doing this, I think there's a lot of numbers on the page. Qualitatively, as I mentioned, I hear complexity, I hear risk, I hear we have so much to do. We have to focus on getting the main thing right. But we also hear that we don't have the data. We don't have the specific enough data on day one about how people are engaging, what they're responding to, what they're not responding to, what their behavior is. And, that can really be a problem. We also hear sometimes that we don't have the right technology. Often, I think if you dig into this, the technology is there, but maybe the group within the organization that has the technology isn't involved until right before launch. They're not involved in the 18 months before launch. So lots of things here to dig into. And maybe we could focus our discussion now on how do we get past some of these challenges. So let's continue to build from what we were talking about a few minutes ago, and maybe we start with data. I think one of you were mentioning that sometimes we have data from another launch. So can we start with everything that we know about that customer, from regardless of where that came within the organization? What has to change for that to happen, or is that already happening today? And can anyone share some of their experiences about that?
Emily, and maybe I can start from a bit earlier. The discussion and the challenge for the coordination, the data, insight challenges, all these challenges were existing the past 20 years. I think the way we solve them has changed massively, especially post-COVID in the past few years, coming AI into the picture. The way that we solve these things now, there is no excuse for insight, for data. We have everything available. It's just matter how do we leverage them, how do we use them, and of course this is differ from being in a big corporate like big companies rather than the mid-size or biotechs. So it's in different layers, has different meanings. But in general, I think data is available. It's just the value that we have and we need to consider internally for personalization and then going and seeking the data. As Anton mentioned, we have a lot of internal knowledge from the past launches. If it's going to new TA, we have a lot of insight with the other companies that can provide us that. But also we have a lot of data that we can purchase, we can acquire, or we can even generate in a very quick time during the pre-launch period with our medical team. So I think the insight and data is there. It's just the willingness to start using them, applying to their global to local strategy of building the content in a way that is differ per character and per different dimensions, and then delivering them at the launch together with the in coordination with the medical team, sales team, or any other frontline team. So I see it as something moving very fast forward, especially AI coming to the picture.
But it's different groups in the company, right? I mean, so if let's say you launch to gastroenterologists, you have a different product, maybe it's even a different indication, and there was a previous product on the market that was relevant to gastro. There might be a group of people in a company who know about their account structure and the way that their financials work and all these things, but we have to be honest, they're not the same group working on the launch, right? So
Yes.
any tips from any of you on how you take advantage of that data? Because just because it exists somewhere doesn't mean that we're leveraging it in a timely manner.
Well, part of that is creating kind of digital twins, right? I think that's something that we used to discuss, and that's part of, I think, a lot of the AI processes right now is because we are able to kind of track individual physicians' behavior through their NPIs, right? We can see where they're traveling to. That's where a lot of this personalization delivery can come from, based on, being able to see how they're responding, how much time is being spent. And so you can extrapolate that type of data from previous launches for kind of behavior, right? And then that's where the Gen AI really becomes a powerful tool for us, and something that we really see as a vision moving forward of something that will be critical, is because you use that data as a feedback loop to better customize messages for anybody entering the pipeline of messages that may not be familiar to us, right? It's like it's a new user, they're never been identified, but based on their kind of early history of how they're interacting with content and which messages they're responding to in which channels, you can extrapolate which messages they'll probably respond to best based on their previous tracking history. So I think we have the technology right now. We have a lot of history. It's just I think it's incorporating it, and I think that's where this is a little bit of a new frontier for all of us with AI coming on board like this.
That's right. I think precision medicine and having all these also tests that physicians have to order and so forth, we're finding out more and more when these tests are being done. And those are the moments where we need to kind of act upon and kind of think about, okay, the physician is going to try to make a decision about what's the best treatment for this patient, right? And so I think we know more about when these moments are happening, and we just need to take advantage of them, right? Because I think in past we didn't know in real time when things were happening. So I think that's something we definitely need to take advantage of. I would also say, in companies, everyone's learning. So when I'm on a brand that I feel like I want to pilot something. I'm like the first to raise my hand. Hey, we'll try it. And you just kind of have to take a chance, with a smaller group of physicians that you think, that you can make impact with. But I agree, change is not something that happens overnight. We need to stay close to the data folks, right? And really learn what are the new things that are coming. What more can we learn about our customers? Because that's ever evolving. And I think it's critical to stay on top of that.
I see
And
a interesting tension when I work with companies at launch where there is an acknowledgement that there's heterogeneity in needs and preferences. There's actually often a really beautiful segmentation that's done, digging into that and understanding that. But then when it comes to how you're going to communicate your value prop and how you're going to go to market, those things don't always translate. Again, we go back to this. I have this really good story and I just wanted to get it out there. We have a lot to do and I want to get it done. And so I guess what do we have to show or prove to kind of break that cycle? Like what are markets or situations where you believe that, there's actually risk in acknowledging that there are individual needs, but not addressing them through your content in the first 12 months? Like, what do you, I think that the name of the webinar that Reuters put on here is de-risking your launch strategy. And the reason that name is on there is because a lot of times people think that deviating from this really amazing story is risky. Deviating from this playbook and introducing complication is risky. But is it risky to do it, or is it risky not to do it?
well, I would almost build to answer your question, build on what Maya just said is, the risk is ultimately we're patient focused, right? We're patient centric. And part of this personalization is the fact that we're able to inform HCPs of the right message, right? In order for them to make informed treatment decisions, right? So that especially like in precision medicines, being able to understand what the options the patient has early on is very critical, right? So to me, the risk is if we don't get that messaging correct, right, patients may not be able to get on optimal treatments. And so I think it's very important for us to have that understanding and be able to kind of bring those messages forward in the best way possible, because that is ultimately what impacts patient care. And I think that's where the risk is, right? We're as patient forward marketers, we want to make sure that we're giving them the information right away so they see it so that there's no confusion there.
And Anton explained it in a very good way. I just add one additional element to it. Our customers now are really got used to visiting and seeing us as a sales team, as a pharma companies. So it's not new anymore for them, a medical rep or sales reps going to them and start opening the detail aid and showing them, these are the message that we would like to deliver to you. So in 5 minutes, they could understand whether us going to them with a pre-assessment what is needed for their patient or themselves, or we are just going there to deliver a message that we have received from global team. So this is really obvious. And if we do not do the personalization, we might create a very negative engagement from day one, which we don't want to do that, right? So it's going to take, as you had in a slide, it's going to take a lot of effort to clean that and to make it to the point zero. So that's why personalization from day one, it's must. And I see it in the chat that some people that are asking, so how do we measure this? So how do we measure the impact? First of all, if you have the engagement with customer, means that you are doing something right because the customer is willing to see you again. The second measurement, you would consider that whether the customer is moving toward the direction that you are helping them to move in. And that's basically is to make sure that their patient gets their best treatment option. And of course, we would like to be ethical. The best treatment option doesn't mean always our prescription or our brands. We would like to partner our customers to make sure that they get the best choice for their customer or for their patients. And in order to do that, we need to understand their challenges, their patient types, and how can we solve together their challenges. So you can see the different approach, whether we go as a very arrogant big pharma company to customer and tell them that we have built this brand, this is what you need to know, and then prescribe for your patient, rather than to go to them, tell them that, we know your challenges, we have learned that you have this type of issues with your patients, can we help together, can we make something together? And that would be a different approach, and it wouldn't be possible without personalization.
That's right. I mean, I would just say that personalizing in launch is not necessarily novel. I think where it's novel is with the new data that's out there and putting it into the omni-channel, world out there, right? Because I think just with sales reps, they've been doing this. I mean, we've been giving them tools like, for example, rep triggered emails, right? Where there's a variety of them and the rep makes a decision about which is going to be the right email to send to that physician because they know them, right? I think what we're talking about here also is just in terms of all the digital age and all the information we have on these physicians, is how to like get the physicians through the digital, channels at the right moment with the right content, right? When a rep can't see them. And I think that's what we're trying to talk more about today, is that there's just so much new information out there about physicians that we didn't have at our fingertips before.
I think that's a great way transition to get specific about some of this how and some of this new data. So I'll summarize a couple of things that you all have shared already, starting with everything that the company knows about the customer. Using Gen AI to summarize maybe what we've learned even from prior similar launches, even in a different space. I think those are two things that you've brought up already. Thinking about a specific segment of customers that might have a very unique need. And I think then we would predict who is in that segment so we can make sure that we're executing. What else have you seen? What other data sources or approaches sort of give you this type of insight that you're talking about on day one?
Well, I think Maya also brought it up in terms of the rep being at the center of it all, right? Had the rep actually having the knowledge of these customers from having those relationships over the years. And actually, I feel like the rep triggered emails are an important part of an omni-channel strategy because you can utilize the type of emails that they're sending and what they're utilizing most to guide what's being most impactful. Because you'll see right away that they're leaning heavily on one type of message, right, or another, and that can help inform how you build out the rest of the message platform and where you need to tweak things and where you need to kind of remove them. And that's, I guess, some of the questions I'm seeing also, in regard to kind of digital twinning or personalization involves that, right? And sometimes it's also just having that approach where and once again, I'm kind of taking us a little bit out of the, how the rep kind of interacts there and can kind of help guide some of that strategy to create that personalization. Because using that as your feedback loop and then bringing in certain field reps into the process, I think is super critical. And that's what actually a lot of times yields better content that's more streamlined and has a better impact for the customer because they've been kind of looped into the process. And ultimately, like we have to remember, right? We can reach some of the customers, but reps are there every single day, right? And they're the ones that are using the core visual aids, they're using the pieces the most, right? And bringing them into the process to kind of create the scope and understand what messages would resonate best with their customer bases is super critical.
I think that's an excellent point when we are launching in a space where reps have been in that space before. So, they've already have some relationships and understanding. What about when it's in a completely new specialty, completely new to the company? How do we still extrapolate insights? I mean, insights and engagement, it's an evolution. It changes over time. It doesn't have to be perfect at day one. I think what we're talking about here is not starting at 0, maybe starting at 20 and then getting closer to 80 or 100. But what are ways that we could do this for a new area that often when that happens, it's like a make or break for the company and it's a ton of focus on it and it's really critical. What have you seen work then?
I mean, when it's a new area, we do a lot of market research. I mean, that's what I would say. It's really like getting those insights early on. And I mean, like at least a year before launch, right? Like we really want to understand the disease
If not
area.
2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah. And really understand, I guess, when the decision points are being made, and really trying to get as much data on the target segment that we're going to be approaching. Again, I think what we said earlier is you're not going to personalize everything from day one. But like I said, if you start small, right? Start somewhere to start getting those insights and easy wins early on and convince senior management that this is a good idea to do in other segments. I think through the reps, we learn a lot in terms of like who the physicians are, you know, as like a few months go by after they do their first initial visits. But I think also, you know, besides market research, it's like doing advisory boards, right? Like really like learning from the physicians what their thoughts are and like really thinking about what are the different segments that I can have for this pool of HCPs. I think that's important. And then I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about is MLR, right? And that's an important kind of challenge that
Yeah,
takes, you know.
there's a comment about that. I think maybe one thing to build before we go to MLR, which is a nice next topic on your market research point. You know, before those insights sort of stayed within a report and they mattered for the 200 people that you learned about. Now with AI, you could actually predict an attitude that you find in market research for an entire universe. And what is your barrier going to be? What is your barrier going to be? What is your barrier going to be? So that exists now. Now executing on that is still complicated. It's hard, right? But I think to the point that you all have brought up, do you do that with a non-personal engine and you know in the backgrounds and let the rep do their thing versus trying to say, okay, we're going to launch from day one with these 8 stories. I think that can add to complexity, but you know, do you have a different cadence? Do you have a different emphasis? Do you have a version that's much more data and science heavy and one that's more patient focused? I mean, those are things that we've seen over and over again matter. And I do think they can be predicted and projected through market research. So I think that's a really nice point in a new TA. I just wanted to put a bow on that before we move to MLR.
And I think if you're lucky enough to do any sort of market development campaign pre-launch, you get learnings from that as well, right?
Yeah,
And so
great
that's
point.
another thing that I would stress is that you can actually do some things pre-launch to learn about your customer segment.
There's a question here, and I think you mentioned it, Maya, on MLR and how personalized content is approved from the beginning. And how there's so much to do at launch. So what's realistic in terms of what we actually put out there and what's maybe some bite-sized ways to make that feasible but still impactful?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's like, again, we said like building modular so you can change the content for the different patient segments. And that's a big undertaking, but it's worthwhile if you're able to tweak the messages for a physician segment based on what their needs are and what they want to hear. Anton, I thought you also had like some thoughts on there.
Yeah, and I think that's just bringing that through early on to MLR for concept reviews so that to explain like, listen, these are the subject matter experts, right? This is what our ad boards showed. These are the type of messages that we feel will have the largest impact early on. These are the messages that we discussed with some of our key sales leaders field, right? That would resonate well based on their knowledge of the physicians in this space, right? That they would utilize and then building out those customized RTEs. And then also just having that personal touch, right? Like not every RTE is opened. A lot of times there's firewalls these days, right? It's being able to deliver those messages in multiple ways, right? From being able to, bring single pagers, which is something very challenging for us to do, obviously, with ISI. There, a single pager is usually a 4 page. But the idea of just having kind of a couple of these pieces and then presenting that universe. And I think that presenting that universe of pieces and taking that through early concept development with MLR teams, and I feel like, that's when they're responsive to it. They understand the ecosystem that you're bringing forward, and that's how it go. That's how you're able to kind of do a first day launch with that a la carte kind of customization. And then you start collecting kind of feedback loop information, so you can do adjustments at like 6 months or a year, based on what the optimal cadence would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to address a question in the chat about similar to this, getting this type of insight on day one. I think, you mentioned a lot of things, Anton. Maya, you mentioned market research. I think the other thing we often start within a very narrow frame of like, I'm launching in condition A, and I'm going to think about everything that I know about condition A, rather than thinking about the frame as the customer frame. I am going to think about, what do I know about this customer based on where they practice, based on how they've behaved through other launches, whether it was my company or not, based on what channels they engage with. What does that say about them? We even, sometimes we have media buying, but even just like their payer mix and the environment that they're in and their patient mix. And, that's not nothing. And I think that's a shift that we're seeing in the industry. It used to be, well, if I don't have 80% coverage of this data source, I don't care. But now it's like, well, if I could tell you all this really deep information about 20% of your customers, isn't that better than not having that? And I think that's another shift that we're seeing just in mindset, right? Is like, it's okay that it's not, I want to go as deep as possible, and it's okay that it's not for everyone. I don't know if that's something that you guys have seen, because a lot of these data sources, to the comments in the chat, they're not perfect and they're not complete. So do we use them on day one? So a lot of times that's why we don't use them on day one, let's be honest, right? It's hard and they're not complete. So, okay, do we just say, I'm not going to do it? Or do we try to nail it for the 20% that we can nail it with?
Well, I think when it comes to data, there's always a little bit of a, it's always an extrapolation, right? We work with imperfect data sources a lot of times, and it depends on your industry, right? Some industries have better transparency. It depends on your TA that you're working on. And I think we're making our best guesses, but sometimes, yes, we're working with maybe only 20% awareness of the markets. Sometimes it's 40%. But it's basically which data we have access to, what's in our data lakes inside our companies, the limitations on purchasing data, of course, right? And so those are best estimations. And I think part of that is just learnings, right? You can launch it based on the data that you have, but if you realize as you're launching or during the launch, right, that maybe some of the assumptions were incorrect because the data may not have given you all of those insights. That's when you learn on the fly. And that's why like kind of having that personalization capability early on already baked in is so critical, because, and I think that's something we haven't really discussed, is the ability to pivot really quickly, right? If you've pre-built these personalization levels, knowing that your data is imperfect, it allows you to do a very quick pivot, because we are dealing with OBDP, T253 submissions, right? In a lot of these scenarios, doing a new submission is challenging. But if you bake it in, that also gives you the ability to pivot. And I think that's very critical. And the ability to pivot is definitely a big part of personalization, and why it's so critical to be thought of, so that there is a plan B, plan C almost already baked in.
And if we go one step ahead or above, it's not only about the content. So content customization, we could also do it with segmentation in the past. We don't need personalization to have the right content for right audience. When it comes complicated, when we include the channel, when we include even having the right customers at the first day versus the next wave. So there are other dimensions that when we add to this personalization, then it makes it a bit complicated. And in some markets, if we don't have insight about the content, maybe we can be flexible on the channels and deliver the same content, but in different channels. So still our customers, they feel that we are paying attention to what they need and how they would like to engage with us. So the ultimate purpose is to have the best engagement, and then the second one is to deliver what we want to deliver. So there are a lot of options that we can use for personalization, which also gives us the flexibility whenever we have the data privacy issue, whenever we have the content challenge issue. Maybe in our company is not even ready to deliver module content or a wide range of content. So then maybe we can focus on something else. But in the best situation is to have the customized content in the customized channel for the right customer. So as you had it in the very beginning slide, Emily, to deliver the right content with the right channel to the right person or stakeholder. So that would be the best personalization. If it's not possible, let's do something here or there until we get to the best situation.
Yeah, great point. And to build on that, I wanted to address a question in the chat about, we're talking about this at a segment level. When do we do it at an N equals 1 level? I do often see that being an evolution over time. Maybe you start at a segment level, but the couple of places I've seen, so that 10 to 15% that I quoted earlier of when it's done at a individual level, I'm happy to share some examples. It's been US, so I'll just acknowledge that. I think our data is richer there. We can't pretend that that's not the case. It's been US. It's been markets where the company already had a large presence with that specialty. And they did two things. One is they started with a profile for that individual based on everything they knew about that in the past, channels, whether they went to certain tactics or programs, whether they were an influencer, what the types of content they've learned in the past. And then also they predicted barriers at an individual level. So that's taking some of either the rep insight or the research, market research, and using AI to say, I predict one of these 12 barriers are going to apply to you. Now, it doesn't mean that they executed that N equals 1 personalization through the field. A lot of that was actually executed through an engine, because again, complication is real. But those are just the examples that I've seen of the few times that I've seen that happen at launch. I hope that addressed the question. If it didn't, please pop another one in there. I think maybe it would be a good time, everyone, to transition to impact. I think there's a bunch of questions in here about impact and ROI. That's kind of our next, Noah, if you can move to the next page, it's sort of our next topic here. Yeah, when we did this survey, we saw that people who measured impact saw high impact, but some, of course, couldn't really didn't know how to measure the impact. And I do think that's a very real challenge. How do we know that the juice is worth the squeeze? Do we need to show the impacts? And if we do, how might we do that? How might we get buy-in internally to push the envelope here and to do something like this from day one?
I think part of that is building those kind of metrics in front of what you consider success, right? Basically looking at, are you going to do a market research study that's going to look at the impact of personalization, which I suspect probably a lot of the respondents that said, saw some moderate or high impact, they probably kind of built in some of the tactics and some of the research that would happen to kind of create those feedback loops. I think it's also just understanding the data that comes off it, right? So it might be that they didn't see impact because the messages were too potentially, generic, right? Or didn't, all of the research that was done ahead of time, the creative execution may not have hit on target, and it wasn't personalized enough, right? And I feel like seeing even a flat line is an answer, right? So to create an evolution as part of that, evolving the messaging at that point. But I think that we have to kind of build in those KPIs up ahead, like how do we measure those performance metrics? Are we measuring open rates? Are we measuring clicking on the CTA, how often that's being done? Are we seeing them leave the website really quickly? If once it's leading to a website, or are they staying on? Are they jumping around? Are they downloading resources? And I think kind of building into those and comparing them to what was happening either in a previous launch or building in a generic message versus a personalized message. You can build an internal control in that way as well to align to. So I feel like there is multiple ways you can kind of set yourself up to measure that, but you have to kind of build it into the messages and the KPIs early on to understand that.
I totally agree, Anton. I think for me, there's different types of metrics, like you said, right? So there are like the metrics that we get from like the digital, how long people stay on the site, how long are people like viewing it, the click-through rate, all of those like very hard metrics. I think one of the other things that I try to look at as well is more what I would say, um, you know, how people are feel like sentiments, right? Like ATUs and so forth. I like to also see like, are we moving the needle on how people are thinking about a certain subject? Because some of these changes don't happen overnight. They're not going to necessarily like, but if you're moving them in the right direction, that could also show impact as well. So that's kind of one of the things that I've been looking at too, is just like sentiment, checking in to see if we've been able to change their mind on a particular topic. Whether it's like, let's just say we talked about personalization of care, like testing, like if you're like have a certain biomarker and you want to see, are those test rates increasing? Like one of the things that we look at is like, are you more likely to do this? Are you bought into doing or including this test in your panel and so forth? So that's something that we've tried to do as well.
And that's a great call out to see also like social sentiment, right? Like looking at social media presence, or is there more conversations at podiums, at conferences as a result of kind of some of the information and education that's being placed out there? And I think that's also a differentiator, right? There's often we go out with both a branded message, but there's also the like disease state awareness or testing state awareness, right? So we do have unbranded campaigns as well that kind of can also influence some of that sentiment and practice changes. So I feel like there's multiple channels there too.
Definitely. And I would say to the person that asked about the ROI, I mean, we'd love to have ROI, but that doesn't happen overnight again. So like showing some of these, other metrics that we're able to increase, I think could help for a pilot to show, hey, this is having some traction. You see this working.
And I think we have significant industry benchmarks by specialty on access rates, on open rates, on engagement rates, right? On perceptions, on awareness. And, that can be a very useful tool to say like, look, we're above benchmarks here. Now, can you say this is what we would have been if we didn't launch with this? No, you probably can't. But we do know typically what that looks like. Either you know it internally as a company or you're working with a partner that has seen it across that specialty. And I've seen that be very compelling. I don't know if you guys think that would be compelling, but it's not necessarily a different KPI because I think that the goal of doing this is to be more effective at helping the innovation that you're bringing to the market reach the patients who need it. I mean, I think Hamidi said that perfectly in the beginning. That's what we're trying to do here, right? So do we need to measure it differently? I don't know. I think we're trying to accomplish the same thing faster and better, more efficiently and more effectively. But I'm curious if you guys think there's unique measurement in place here when you're doing something like this.
I think all of us at some point in our career were assessed or we assessed others based on the click-through rate or based on these metrics. But I think now, as you mentioned, it's obvious that would not be the only one KPI that we should care about. It's about, as we discussed, the patient side, patient aspect is to make sure the patient gets the right product, but also internally. If I put my commercial hat on, the uptake curve, the patient uptake curve, we see clear difference when we go personalized approach to the market. We see more aggressive patient uptake curve in the beginning versus the other brands or the traditional way of launching in the past, when we gradually start and then we pick up after maybe 12 months of the launch. So that's, I think, the speed and the pace of the patient uptake curve, it would be one of the most important KPIs, at least based on my experience, that can show that we have engagement and effective engagement with our customers. Another one would be that how quick we can have the feedback loop. Because it's not, we always start with the global, with the set of mindset that we would like to deliver a specific content based on our trials to our customers, but not always we make the right decision. So how quick we can course correct based on the customer feedback, that also helps. Again, maybe it's part of CRM, maybe you would consider as a part of personalization, but is all of them are the whole a big ecosystem that we need to build to make sure that from global to local, we have this ecosystem. And then the measurement come at the end, again, from engagement perspective or internal from commercial perspective, we see a clear, stronger performance.
Maybe a provocative question for you guys. The industry, if I take us outside of launch for a second, and I just think of a maybe more mature product, companies are investing tremendously in personalization in general, right? Like we see that, we all know that, we can all nod at that. There's actually really good measurement in place that to many of the points we've made go beyond some of the initial engagement and look at perceptions and then outcomes. Many of the things you're referring to, did I change behavior? Does a customer feel like I'm being relevant to them? Am I creating advocacy? So I think that's moving to a really good place for kind of a mature product. So I guess if that same framework was applied at launch, would that be enough to show impact and kind of, again, sort of convince that the juice is worth the squeeze? Like, why not just move that over? What would be, would people still feel like there's risk?
I think the point you were bringing up is that companies would feel much more comfortable if they start with a more mature brand with a lot of these things, right? Like the personalization. And so I think there's a comfort level, and I think that it's easier to start it with, a brand that's been in place for a while and try something a little bit different. I mean, I think that's kind of, how I've been tackling it. Start with a brand that you feel comfortable with, the target segments really well, and you start in that way. I think slowly this is like the wave of the future, right? We're kind of like in this huge, evolution of data, and it's important for companies to get on this sooner rather than later, right? You want to be ahead of the curve with innovation. And so I totally agree. I think that it's for companies to feel comfortable doing this on all of their existing products before they bring it to the launch. I think the whole idea of this is like de-risking. They feel like doing something brand new they've never done before at launch is a little bit scary. And so you want to get really good at this with the brands that you have that are already existing. That's my take on it. I don't know if Hamid or Anton, you have other.
I totally agree with you. I feel like like the learnings really do come from existing brands where you need to kind of refresh messaging just because there's message wear out, and you can gain a lot of learnings, and then you want to be strategic, right? You want to understand this is our pipeline, right? These are the locations where we have upcoming molecules. So let's do some of this experimentation on existing products, and we know what's coming down the pipeline. And how do we start incorporating that now so that we kind of use these types of best practices with up and coming launches? And I think, but we do have to learn on the existing products to understand how the system works, and what's viable, what's not viable. And listen, it's once again there's going to be errors made when you do a launch, right? It's just the nature of launches. There's always learnings that happen on the fly, and every product has unique requirements and unique things that happen with any product launch. So you just have to you take care of as many of them as possible. But I totally agree with you on how to approach that.
Yeah, and I think de-risking, one of the things is to stay on the data, like keep looking at the metrics, and not wait like a few months, right? You got to stay on it, review it, and then if something and then is not working, course correct as quickly as you can. So I think that's something that, I've taken as a best practice, is like trying to get those reports sooner, understand the reports, and not waiting, 2 months to make a decision on how things are going.
Yeah, yeah. And building those sentiment kind of evaluations much more frequently with a launch brand. I mean, those first 6 months are so critical that you really have to do it more often than when we have legacy brands where we only check in maybe every 6 months.
There's a question in the chat about, so are we saying that we should pilot with an established product and then execute with a launch product? I think it depends on what we're talking about with pilot. I think if it's the first time that an organization is doing a personalized omni-channel approach, I don't see a lot of appetite to do that for the very first time at launch. I don't know if you guys do. I'm just being honest. I think that it is helpful to have those capabilities up and running and for everyone to see the value of the pre and post of implementing that, and then use that as a case to point it to this very critical launch that's coming up. Now, maybe piloting it at a launch can happen in some organizations, but just from my experience, I do think that it's an easier path and a more common path to do it that way. I think what I would love to prevent is only doing it for mature brands and not
That's right.
pointing this amazing capability that you've invested in into this really critical opportunity. I think that's really what we're talking about shifting.
Yeah, I think Anton got a perfect example. Like if there's a more mature brand that has a branding refresh, new campaign, and you're investing money in it, you want to know how it's going, right? And so that's a great type of example to start with within an organization.
There's a question in here about affiliates kind of buying into this that Hamid, I wonder if you have perspective on. Do affiliates buy into this approach? And sometimes they struggle ex-US to kind of spend rep time segmenting HCPs and doing something personal. And how do you kind of get them on board and show them that it might be worth it in the beginning of a launch?
Yeah. I've seen affiliate even driving this change when there is a good and sufficient support from the whole other part of the organization. This personalization is not something that we do at the very latest stage in affiliate. It needs to be a start much earlier when we are thinking how to build a global campaign and then going to the local. So affiliate, normally they are the front runner. If they are equipped with sufficient material, approach, mindset. I've seen more challenges in the global and more region, and then when we go the higher level layer in the organization, because they are more senior people. They have been in the organization for 40, 30, 20 years. They have got there with working in a traditional way. It's much difficult to ask them, let's think differently. Now, after 20 years working in this slide, let's change the approach and go personalized. At least my observation is that the biggest challenges is with the higher layer of the organization. If we can solve that, if we can create and show the value to the senior leadership, if we can create the mindset, then the flow smoothly goes to affiliate. And of course, affiliate, they see the real value when they engage and contact customers. That's at least what I have observed.
Thanks for that. I think we have just 1 minute left here. So maybe the last question that I'll address in the chat is there's some really great questions about medical. And I do think we're on a surgence of better collaboration between medical and commercial. Medical actually often is engaging with these customers pre-launch. And I think having a way to synthesize and compliantly share those insights is very much on our next frontier as well. I think some of you have mentioned that. So in the interest of time here, I'm just going to thank very much my fellow panelists, all of the great engagement and questions. And I really hope we are on the next frontier of of, combining our advancements and innovations with something, the most critical time to get patients the innovations that we've worked so hard to bring to the market. So thanks everyone, and thanks to everyone who participated and attended.
Yes, thanks to everyone who joined live, and for those who are watching the recording later down the line. You'll all be sent the white paper that was run in association with this webinar, so make sure to check out for that. Thanks a lot for your time, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.